Created by those daring enough to ride after an accident. Fast enough to keep up with superbikes and the twisties. Enough torque that your rear tire has twice the miles of the front. All of this with a dual personality that allows for comfortable street use and touring so long as your neck muscles are up to it. This is the history of naked bikes and how motorcycle accidents led to a new category of motorcycles with an ever-growing popularity. In the late 80s, sport bikes had exploded in popularity, and bikes like the CBR 600F, Gixxer 750, and FZR 1000 became a huge hit among enthusiasts. People quickly figured out the consequences of having supercar performance without seatbelts, protection, or modern safety like anti-lock brakes, and the motorcycle community quickly learned the dangers involved in riding powerful sport bikes. And for those who survived, many people would have their bikes totaled out by insurance after they crashed. But many riders, not yet ready to part ways with their sport bikes, began to realize that under the wrecked fairings of the sport bikes, there was a running motorcycle, which could often be restored to full riding condition. Wrecked fairings could be removed, damaged clip-ons could be replaced with dirt bike bars, and smashed headlights could either be removed or replaced by headlights from other bikes. Many riders realized that they enjoyed the looks or the customizability of these rebuilt sport bikes, and as the trend grew, people began intentionally converting their bikes and the style got a name. They were called street fighters. And some people really took it to the extreme when it came to the cosmetic mods of these early street fighters. And while this crazy style that you see on the screen started out being pretty popular, its popularity slowly died until now it's just a small subculture. For a very small time, I personally owned one of these old school street fighter bikes, but got rid of it once the realities of a 32-year-old carbureted bike caught up to me. Over time, the modifications people made to their street fighters evolved beyond cosmetics, and they could get as ridiculous as turbochargers. But more often, many people outfitted their bikes with bigger rear sprockets for extra torque to do wheelies and burnouts. Putting a bigger rear sprocket will give your bike more torque at lower to medium speed, making the bike feel insanely powerful through this range. The trade-off is that you'll sacrifice a little bit of your top speed. But when you consider that these street fighter bikes didn't have windscreens, the top speed sacrifice wasn't really viewed as a sacrifice because going faster than 150 without a windscreen isn't nearly as fun as doing wheelies or carving twisty roads. And the trade-off of extra torque through the more usable speeds at the expense of all-out top speed became a defining characteristic of street fighters. By the early 90s, this trend grew enough to get the attention of manufacturers, and this gave way to the first factory-produced street fighters. Some of the earliest models being the Ducati Monster in 1993, the Triumph Speed Triple in 1994, and the Suzuki Bandit in 1995. With the introduction of factory-produced street fighters, the name began to change, and these bikes were often marketed as street bikes or roadsters. And many of them, while they still had impressive performance, were quite far off from the modern naked bikes that we see today. Along with the introduction of these factory-produced street fighters, the characteristic of what made a motorcycle a street fighter became more defined and less up to personal customization. The general outlines of these types of bikes became handlebars instead of clip-ons, lower foot peg placement, an emphasis on torque, not just horsepower numbers, significantly less fairings, a tiny windscreen or no windscreen at all, and they're usually detuned and had a lower redline when compared to their sport bike counterparts. At this point, a lot of you guys are probably wondering what's the point of getting a bike like this over a sport bike? There's actually a lot of reasons. The first one's price. Naked bikes are noticeably cheaper than sport bikes, both new and used, and this money saving continues with noticeably cheaper insurance as well. Second, the shorter gearing and focus on torque allows you to stay in the power when you're going through the street or through the back roads, and this allows you to really connect with the bike and use all the gears, as opposed to many sport bikes which require you to ring the bike all the way out to the higher RPMs to feel the power. I'm not saying sport bikes are boring, I'm just saying that often they make less sense on public roads. Additionally, naked bikes have higher bars and usually lower pegs, resulting in a more upright and comfortable riding position, as opposed to the hunched over riding position of many sport bikes. And realistically, sport bikes only have the advantage on the highways or in the hands of very experienced track riders. And that's just the truth. Unless you're very skilled, a sport bike won't be noticeably faster than a naked bike through the twisties. Now, back to the history. Through the 2000s, the name naked bike began to be more popular when referring to these street bikes, and all the major manufacturers jumped on the naked bike trend with their own models. But Yamaha really took it to the next level with what would become their MT series. This began in the early 2000s when Yamaha created the FZ1 and FZ6, which were naked bikes derived from their Yamaha R1 and R6. And in 2010, Yamaha created the FZ8, which was basically an FZ1 with a slightly smaller engine. The result was a bike with a playful 100-ish horsepower and short gearing. Now, I personally own one of these FZ8s, and I believe that it's one of the most underrated and forgotten motorcycles in our current day. Now, this bike was never fully developed into its own distinct motorcycle, and it never really had its moment in the sun. But by this point, Yamaha and other manufacturers realized what the naked bike community wanted, which were middleweight naked bikes perfect for daily use while still having power and capability to pop wheelies and rip through the canyons. For Yamaha, this meant the development of the incredibly popular MT-07 and MT-09, and other manufacturers produced bikes like the Z900, the GSX 750, and the Duke 990. Of course, there's other classes of naked bikes which I haven't yet covered, and all these manufacturers, plus the ones I didn't talk about, all make lower cc beginner-friendly naked bikes, but there's still one category of naked bikes which I haven't yet covered. In the last decade, there's been an increasing demand for what are known as hyper naked bikes, and while this class isn't entirely new, it's been taken to the next level in recent years. And if you want an unmanageable amount of torque and power, there are plenty of options for you, with some of the most ridiculous being models like the Ducati Street Fighter V4, the BMW M1000R, the KTM Super Duke 1390, and Aprilia's 210 V4, and the supercharged Kawasaki ZH2. At the end of the day, you can like and ride whatever you want, but when people are comparing which beginner, intermediate, or advanced bike they should get, very few people mention naked bikes. And when you consider how much fun and how cheap these bikes can be, it's really a shame how underrated and underrepresented they are.